The storm still lingered over Jacksonville, Florida, its gray clouds hanging low as Andrea Jackson guided her sleek black SUV down a quiet suburban street. The air carried the smell of fresh rain, and soft droplets tapped against her windshield, blending with the smooth notes of her favorite jazz playlist. It had been another long day in court, one of many, but Andrea felt a quiet satisfaction. She had once again made a difference in someone's life. At 42, Andrea had earned her place as a respected state attorney. Years of late nights, endless studying, and countless battles in the courtroom had shaped her into a woman who commanded respect. Yet, all of that seemed to fade the moment flashing red and blue lights lit up her rear-view mirror. Her chest tightened, though not from guilt. Andrea was meticulous with everything, even her driving. No speeding, no distractions, no careless mistakes. Still, the sirens demanded her compliance. Taking a steady breath, she pulled over onto the narrow shoulder, placed her phone on the dashboard, and rolled her window halfway down. The officer approached with a practiced air of authority. He was middle-aged, stocky, and wore an expression caught between boredom and intimidation. His hand rested close to his gun as he said curtly, "License and registration." He barely looked at her. Andrea obeyed, handing over her documents, but noticed how his gaze lingered on her face, narrowing slightly, as if he were trying to fit her into a box. "Is there a reason I'm being stopped, officer?" Andrea asked, her voice calm but firm. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced over her paperwork and muttered, "Routine check." Irritation flickered inside her. A routine check? In all her years of driving, she had never been pulled over for something so vague. But Andrea knew better than to argue just yet. Keeping her composure, she folded her hands neatly in her lap and waited. The officer fired off questions in a clipped tone. Where she was coming from, where she was headed, and if there was anything in the vehicle he should know about. Andrea responded with the precision of a seasoned attorney, calm and measured. But the tension between them was sharp, impossible to ignore. His demeanor shifted slightly, showing a flicker of impatience as she remained unshaken. The street was eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional car splashing over wet pavement. The officer glanced around, then leaned closer to her window, his voice sharper now. "Are you sure you don't have anything in this car I should know about?" he pressed, suspicion dripping from his tone. Andrea's brow furrowed, though her face stayed composed. "Officer, I've answered all your questions. Is there a specific reason for this stop?" His lips tightened into a thin line. "Step out of the vehicle." Andrea's pulse quickened. She had heard too many stories, friends, colleagues, even strangers, who face encounters like this that ended badly. But she refused to let fear take over. Moving deliberately, she unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped into the cool, damp air. The officer motioned for her to stand near the rear of her SUV. The officer loomed over her, his hand still resting on his belt. "Spread your arms and place them on the trunk," he ordered. Andrea's jaw tightened, but she obeyed. She felt his stare heavy on her, a mix of suspicion and something darker, an unspoken judgment. He circled her car slowly, peering through the windows like he expected to find something illegal. Her voice cut through the silence, calm but firm. "Officer, I know my rights. If there's no probable cause, then you're acting outside the law." He froze mid-step, his head snapping toward her. "Were you a lawyer or something?" he asked, sarcasm dripping from his tone. Andrea held his gaze without flinching. "What I am is a citizen asking for accountability. Now, I'll ask again, why was I stopped?" His face darkened, but he didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to her car, muttering under his breath as he called in her license plate over the radio. Andrea's heart pounded, but she stood tall, her back straight, her face unreadable. The drizzle in the air dampened her blouse, yet she refused to waver. Minutes passed before he returned. Without meeting her eyes, he shoved her license and registration toward her. "You can go," he said flatly. Andrea didn't move. "Not until you answer my question. Why did you pull me over?" He hesitated, then gave the same excuse. "Routine check." Her anger burned, but she forced it into steady words. "No, this wasn't routine. But I'm glad it happened, because now we have something to discuss." Confusion flickered across his face, But Andrea didn't explain. She took her paperwork, got back into her SUV, and shut the door with deliberate calm. As she drove away, the rain fell harder, but her focus sharpened. Every detail of the encounter replayed in her mind. The officer's tone, his dismissive answers, his demand for obedience without reason. This wasn't just another stop. It demanded action. She pulled into a nearby parking lot and took out her phone. Within seconds, she was on the line with a trusted colleague. "Jeff, I need to report an incident. Pulled over, no probable cause. I'll need to file a formal complaint." Jeff's voice came steady but concerned. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Andrew replied firmly. But this officer wasn't. He didn't know who I was, and his behavior was unacceptable. "This isn't just about me. It's about accountability." Jeff agreed to help her draft the paperwork. When Andrea hung up, anger and determination churned inside her. She had stood up to injustice many times before, but this was different. This was personal. By the next morning, Andrea sat inside the Jacksonville Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. Her tone was professional, but her words carried steel as she described a night before in precise detail. The lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman with no-nonsense energy, listened closely. "Miss Jackson, we take allegations like this very seriously. Do you have any evidence of the encounter?" Andrea slid her phone across the table. She had recorded everything the moment she stepped out of her car. The officer's tone, his evasive answers, and her calm, pointed replies. The investigator listened, her face tightening. "This will be reviewed thoroughly. And you're absolutely right. This was not a routine stop." Andrea leaned back slightly, her gaze steady. "I'm not here to demonize anyone, but this can't be brushed aside. He didn't know who I was, and that's the problem. If I weren't in my position, how much worse could this have been?" The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling heavy in the air. By the time Andrea walked out of the building, she knew one thing for certain. This fight was far from over. Andrea knew she had done the right thing, but she also understood this was only the beginning. As a state attorney, she had a platform, and she was determined to use it. This incident could not be brushed aside. It had to spark a wider conversation about systemic bias and accountability in law enforcement. Back at her office, she drafted a public statement. It wasn't angry or harsh, but a measured call to action, an invitation for community to come together in dialogue. Andrea knew the weight of her words. They could inspire courage, demand justice, and ignite real change. By evening, her statement was live on social media. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages, some full of outrage, others filled with support. The video she had recorded was already spreading fast. Thousands were watching, commenting, and sharing their own painful experiences. The officer's actions were now under public scrutiny, and people refused to stay silent. Andrea sat back in her chair, watching the wave of reactions roll in. This was no longer just her story. It had become a movement. By the next morning, Andrea's video had gone viral. Major news outlets picked up the story. Hashtags like #JusticeForAll and #EndProfiling trended nationwide. Comments poured in from every corner of the country, some praising Andrea's composure, others sharing their own run-ins with police, all demanding systemic change. Her phone rang early. On the line was Chief Richard Turner, head of the Jacksonville Police Department. His voice was careful, a mix of concern and damage control. "Miss Jackson, I want to personally assure you we are investigating thoroughly. The officer has been placed on administrative leave, pending review." Andrea listened quietly before responding, her tone calm but firm. "Chief Turner, I appreciate the swift action, but this is bigger than one officer. What happened to me points to a much deeper issue, and I think you know that." The chief hesitated. "I'd like to invite you to a community roundtable we're organizing. We need voices like yours to help guide real reform." Andrea agreed, but only under one condition. The roundtable had to be public, with community leaders at the table, those who had been fighting for change long before this incident. She wasn't interested in private gestures or quiet promises. This needed to be open, transparent, and transformative. In the days that followed, Andrea's story continued to spread. Invitations to appear on national television poured in, but she chose carefully. This wasn't about fame or spectacle. She kept the focus where it belonged, on the systemic issues that allowed incidents like hers to happen. Meanwhile, the officer, Sergeant Brian Holcomb, came under intense scrutiny. Local reporters uncovered a troubling history of complaints for discriminatory behavior. Public outrage exploded. Protests swelled outside the police department. Signs rose into the air. Accountability now, and justice for all. People from every walk of life gathered, united in their demand for change. Andrea watched from her office window, pride mixing with the heavy weight of responsibility. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about countless untold stories, about people who never got the chance to speak up. Her phone buzzed again. It was Jeff. They've agreed to the round table. Next week, City Hall. Andrea nodded to herself, determination burning in her eyes. The road ahead would be long, but she was ready. This was the fight she had been preparing for her entire career. When the day arrived, Jacksonville City Hall was packed. Cameras lined the walls. Rows of seats filled with community members, activists, and even off-duty police officers. The room buzzed with anticipation. At the center of it all sat Andrea, calm, confident, commanding. Beside her were other advocates for justice. Chief Turner opened the meeting with a carefully prepared statement. He spoke of reform, of commitment, of acknowledging the department's failures. When he finished, Andrea leaned into her microphone. Her voice rang steady and clear. "Thank you, Chief Turner, for recognizing the need for change. But let's not sugarcoat the truth. We are here because of deep, long-standing issues that have harmed communities for decades. This isn't just about my experience. It's about a system that disproportionately targets Black and marginalized people." She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the room. "Let me make one thing clear. Accountability is not optional. It is necessary, and it starts here, with all of us." The room erupted in applause, but Andrea wasn't finished. Andrea didn't waste words. She laid out clear steps for reform, mandatory anti-bias training for every officer, independent oversight committees, and real consequences for misconduct that went beyond a slap on the wrist. Her voice was sharp and precise, but it struck a chord with the crowd. Across the table, community leaders shared their own stories, account of harassment, profiling, and discrimination that revealed just how deep the problem ran. Andrea listened closely, nodding as each voice added to the truth of what had long been ignored. Sergeant Holcomb's name surfaced again and again. The complaints against him were not minor details. They were glaring evidence of the department's failure to act. The weight in the room shifted as more people began to understand the full scope of the problem. When Holcomb's lawyer finally stood to speak, the tension was thick. He painted his client as a man who had simply made a mistake, claiming that Andrea's traffic stop didn't define his character. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd, but Andrea stayed steady. "Intent matters," she said firmly once the lawyer sat down. "But so do actions and consequences. If we don't hold people accountable, we are telling our community their lives don't matter, and I refuse to send that message." Her words cut through the room like steel, and the effect was undeniable. By the time the roundtable ended, the Jacksonville Police Department had publicly committed to several of Andrea's reforms, including an independent review board and greater transparency in misconduct investigations. But Andrea knew the truth. This was only the beginning. Real change would take sustained effort, and she was ready. In the months that followed, the ripple effect of her stand became clear. The reforms began to take shape. Officers went through mandatory anti-bias training. A review board was set up to handle complaints independently. For the first time in years, the community felt a glimmer of hope that the system might finally work for them, not against them. Andrea became a leading voice in the movement, balancing her demanding role as state attorney with her new mission as an advocate for justice. She spoke at universities, community centers, and national conferences. Each time, she told her story not as a tale of victimhood, but as a testament to resilience and the power of action. This isn't about vilifying individuals, she would remind her audiences. It's about fixing the systems that allow injustice to survive. It's about building a society where fairness isn't a privilege, it's a right. Her words inspired others to share their stories, pushing for change in their own communities. Social media carried her message far beyond Jacksonville. The video of her encounter with the officer reached millions, sparking discussions nationwide. As for Sergeant Holcomb, he faced disciplinary hearings and was ultimately dismissed from the force. His downfall became a cautionary tale across the country, a warning that abuse of power would no longer be ignored. But Andrea wasn't finished. She worked with lawmakers on new legislation aimed at transparency and accountability in policing. The bill, informally called Andrea's Law by supporters, gained bipartisan traction, cementing her status as a true change maker. One evening, Andrea sat quietly on her porch, watching her daughter Amara play in the yard. The laughter of children filled the air, a sharp contrast to the weight of her battles. For a moment, Andrea allowed herself to reflect. This wasn't just about her. It was about Amara's future, and about making sure children like her could grow up without fearing the very people meant to protect them. Andrea smiled faintly, picking up her notebook to jot down a new speech for the week ahead. Her message was simple but powerful. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to act in spite of it. And when we act together, we can build the world we all deserve. A world where justice isn't just a dream, but a reality. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, Andrea felt a deep sense of purpose. Her fight was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. This was no longer just her story. It was a movement, and she was determined to see it through